The embassy hall was designed to make everyone feel small. The ceiling curved high above like a frozen wave of glass and metal, reflecting soft white light across polished floors. Flags of dozens of species floated slowly in the air, held by invisible gravity fields. Human diplomat Elias Mercer had walked this hall many times, yet today felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air, the kind that made even trained diplomats speak a little less and listen a little more. Elias stood near one of the translation pillars, reviewing data on his wrist screen. The meeting had gone well enough. Trade routes were stable, border conflicts delayed, and the usual political arguments had ended without shouting. By Galactic standards, it was a success. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt watched. He looked up slowly, scanning the crowd. Delegates from insectoid worlds clicked softly as they moved. Tall crystalline beings reflected light in sharp angles. A group of Threxians stood apart from everyone else, as they always did. They were tall, slender, and dark-skinned, their bodies covered in faint silver markings that shifted when they moved. Their eyes were large and still, giving them an unreadable expression. The Threxians were known for silence and control. They did not speak unless necessary. They did not show emotion. They did not approach humans without formal request. One of them was walking toward him. Elias straightened his posture. The Threxian was female, older by the deep lines along her markings. Her movement was slow but deliberate. Conversations around them faded as others noticed what was happening. A Threxian matriarch did not approach a human diplomat without reason. When she stopped in front of him, the space between them felt heavy. "Diplomat Mercer," the translator pillar spoke for her, its tone neutral. "Yes," Elias replied calmly. "How may I help you?" "I came," she whispered, "because my daughter desperately wants to see you human." Her silver markings flickered faintly, a sign of emotional strain that most species never noticed. She asked, she insisted. "That is enough. For both our peoples." He thought of how often humans were accused of spreading chaos simply by existing. "I will listen," he said finally. "That is all I can promise." Conversations slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Something unseen had shifted. Elias stood still for several seconds, then activated a private channel on his wrist. "Security," he said softly. "I need a review of Threxian internal protocols regarding juveniles." "Neither is what just happened," Elias said. As the hall began to empty, Elias moved toward one of the viewing windows. Beyond the transparent barrier, the planet rotated slowly below, covered in lights that marked countless lives moving without knowledge of what had just begun. He wondered what kind of child could disturb a civilization known for emotional silence. And why that child had chosen a human. Later that cycle, Elias sat alone in his assigned quarters. The room was modest, designed to suit multiple species, though it always felt slightly wrong for humans. He removed his formal jacket and placed it carefully on a chair. His wrist screen glowed with information. Threxian culture files scrolled past his eyes. Emotional suppression training. Collective identity doctrine, severe consequences for cultural deviation. No recorded cases of juvenile-driven diplomatic requests until now. A soft tone sounded at his door. He froze. "Mercer," a voice said through the translator system. "It is I." She stepped inside, scanning the room with cautious interest. "I should not be here," she said. "Then why are you?" Elias asked. "Because time matters," she replied. "My daughter's request has been noticed." "Nothing is slow where fear exists," she answered. She moved closer to the window, gazing at the planet below. "My daughter is different," she said. "From birth, she questioned silence. She asked why we do not speak of loss, why we do not tell stories. You cry, you laugh, you argue, you fail, and you try again." Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on him now. "If I meet her," he said, "it must be approved." A quiet alert flashed on Elias' wrist, an incoming message marked confidential. "Council summons," he muttered. The matriarch nodded. "They have felt the ripple." The door closed behind her, leaving Elias alone with the glow of distant stars and a choice that had arrived far sooner than he expected. He looked at his reflection in the glass. Just a human, just a diplomat. And somehow that was enough to scare an entire civilization. Part 1 ends. The chamber was nothing like the embassy hall. It was smaller, darker, and built deep within the Threxian habitat ring. The walls curved inward, covered in smooth black material that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Only thin lines of soft white illumination ran along the floor, guiding movement without drawing attention. Elias Mercer walked quietly between two Threxian escorts, his footsteps strangely loud in the silence. No one spoke. The air felt heavy, not with threat, but with restraint. Everything about this place seemed designed to contain something dangerous, not weapons, but thoughts. At the far end of the chamber stood the matriarch. She waited alone, her posture rigid, her silver markings dim. When Elias approached, the escorts stopped and stepped back, fading into the shadows. "You came," she said. "I said I would listen," Elias replied. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing something invisible. Then she turned and gestured toward a sealed door beside her. "She is inside," the matriarch said. "Before you enter, there are things you must understand. By yours, perhaps not so much. Our species matures differently." Full of contradiction, the matriarch looked at him again, and this time there was no mistaking the emotion behind her eyes. "She believes confusion is not weakness," she said. "She believes it is proof of freedom." Catherine stood near the center, her back turned. She was smaller than Elias expected, her frame slender, her markings brighter and more fluid than her mother's. They shifted gently across her skin like slow-moving stars. She turned when she sensed him. Her eyes were wide, curious, and unmistakably alive. "You are real," Catherine said. The translator rendered her voice with a slight tremble, not from fear, but from excitement carefully held back. "Yes," Elias said, "I am. You are speaking because I am here." Catherine turned back to Elias. "I asked to see you because I needed to confirm something. We are very aware." Her markings pulsed gently, faster now. "That is what my people have forgotten," she said. The matriarch shifted uneasily. Catherine continued, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "My people believe stability is survival. That silence is safety. That emotion leads to collapse. Yet you persist." "When I asked to see you," she said, "they told my mother it was dangerous. Civilizations that remove emotion become quiet, then still, then gone. We also remind the galaxy how much damage that can cause," he said. "Yes," Catherine agreed, "but damage can be repaired, absence cannot." "I do not want to become a symbol," she said. "I want to understand. We survive because we share the weight." A voice spoke, cold and distant. "This interaction is concluded." "Wait," she said. The matriarch reached out instinctively but stopped herself. Catherine looked at Elias one last time. "Thank you for coming." As Elias walked back through the dim corridors, escorted in silence, he felt the weight of what had begun. This had not been a simple meeting. It was a crack in something old and rigid, and cracks, he knew, had a way of spreading. Far behind him, in a quiet chamber filled with watchers, a young Threxian stood still, her markings glowing faintly, holding onto something her people had nearly forgotten. Curiosity. The council chamber was vast, far larger than the room where Elias had met Catherine. It was built to impress and to intimidate. The floor stretched wide and smooth, dark as still water. Above it, rings of light hovered in perfect circles, each one representing a level of authority. Threxian elders stood within those rings, tall and unmoving, their silver markings faint and controlled. Elias stood alone at the center. He had been escorted there without explanation. No words, no delay, just silent movement through corridors that seemed to narrow with every step. Now he understood why. This was not a discussion, it was a judgment. The matriarch stood among the elders, her posture formal, her expression carefully empty. She did not look at Elias. A voice echoed through the chamber, calm and sharp. "Human diplomat Elias Mercer," the council said, "you have engaged in unauthorized cultural exchange." "I was invited." "Honestly," Elias met their gaze. "So are all beings who learn." The matriarch's markings flickered once quickly before settling again. "You challenge our core principles," the council said. "I didn't come to challenge them," Elias replied. "Your child did. You just don't like where it's pointing." "We just repeat." "What gives you the right," the council asked, "to introduce this burden to others?" She was not supposed to be there, but she had learned how systems bent when enough curiosity pressed against them. She listened to every word. Her markings glowed faintly, responding to ideas more than sounds. In the chamber, the council spoke again. "Your presence has already caused unrest among our youth. That was never my goal. She will know something is missing, just as you taught her to. But I have observed that silence can also be avoidance. Choice risk. I ask because he is ordinary, and yet his people endure." The human will be confined until deliberation concludes. Only a strange sense of certainty. Something irreversible had already happened. In confinement, his room was small and quiet. No windows, no communication, just light and silence. Time passed slowly. He thought of Earth, of people arguing, laughing, rebuilding, of how noise meant life. Far away, the council debated. Data was reviewed, youth behavior analyzed. Patterns emerging where none had existed before. Questions were spreading. Catherine sat alone in her quarters, replaying human voices in her mind, stories of loss and hope, of failure and persistence. She did not feel calm, she felt awake. The matriarch stood before the council once more. "You cannot erase what has already moved," she said. "The idea exists now." "Humans do not conquer with weapons," the matriarch continued. "They infect with possibility." And that question, once asked, could never truly be silenced. Time moved differently inside the Threxian habitat. For Elias Mercer, confined within a quiet chamber of smooth black walls, time felt stretched and thin. There were no clocks, no windows, no sounds beyond the faint hum of systems working somewhere far away. The light remained constant, soft and neutral, as if even shadows were discouraged from forming. He sat on the edge of the narrow resting platform, hands folded, breathing slow and steady. Humans were good at waiting. They had learned it through long years of uncertainty. Still, this kind of waiting carried weight. Every thought felt louder when there was nothing else to hear. He wondered how Catherine was doing. Far above him, beyond layers of controlled corridors and observation rooms, the Threxian Council was no longer calm. Information moved through their systems faster than any official discussion. Youth across the habitat ring were showing subtle changes, slight delays before responding, longer pauses, questions that did not follow approved patterns. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly rebellious, but enough to be noticed, enough to worry them. The council gathered again, this time not in perfect silence. Their markings flickered more often now, small betrayals of internal strain. Data projections floated between them, displaying patterns that had no easy explanation. "These fluctuations began after human exposure," one elder stated. "And after suppression attempts," another added. "That is correlation, not cause," a third said. The matriarch stood among them, composed but alert. "You taught our people to observe patterns," she said calmly. "You cannot dismiss them simply because they are uncomfortable." She had been ordered to remain there. No visitors, no transmissions, no outside input. They believed isolation would calm her. Instead, it gave her space to think. She replayed the human's words again and again, not as sound, but as meaning. Shared weight, choice, trying again after failure. Concepts that did not fit neatly into Threxian logic, yet refused to fade. She rose and moved toward the wall, placing her hand against the smooth surface. Somewhere beyond it, systems watched her, measured her, classified her. She did not feel anger, she felt clarity. Elsewhere, something unexpected was happening. Human networks beyond the habitat had noticed Elia's disappearance. At first, it was a quiet concern, a diplomat delayed, a communication gap. Then the pattern became harder to ignore. Human governments requested explanations. Polite at first, formal, then persistent. The Threxian responses were careful and slow. Humans did not respond with threats, they responded with presence. Human ships began arriving at nearby neutral stations, not warships, cultural vessels, research craft. Civilian transports carrying artists, historians, teachers, and mediators, people who spoke in stories instead of demands. They broadcast openly. They shared recordings of human history, not the clean versions, but the flawed ones, mistakes, recoveries, moments where humanity nearly failed and chose not to stop. The signals were not directed at the Threxians alone. They were open to anyone who wished to listen, and many did. Within the Threxian habitat, those signals leaked through filters never designed to block honesty. Youth heard voices speaking of loss without shame, of fear without surrender, of hope that survived even when logic said it should not. The council noticed the increase immediately. "This is interference," one elder said. "This is exposure," the matriarch replied. "The difference matters." "You should not be here," Elias said softly. "Neither should any of this," she replied. She entered and let the door close behind her. "The council is divided," she said. "That has not happened in generations." "You didn't erase her memory," he said. "No," the matriarch replied. "We tried to delay, to soften, it failed. You show your weaknesses openly." "And you." The elders watched her with a mix of concern and something else. Recognition. "You defied isolation," the council said. "Yes," Catherine replied. "I used the skills you taught me. We were worried. Emotion leads to instability, only to remember what you already were. The human will be released. Not physically, but in feeling. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of something new. The council did not argue. So be it, they said. Later, as Elias prepared to depart, the matriarch walked with him to the docking corridor. Human ships glimmered beyond the transparent barrier, calm and patient. My daughter will lead differently, she said. She already is, Elias replied. She paused. Your people never intended to rule. And that, Elias knew, was how everything truly began. The human ship moved slowly away from the Threxian habitat, its engines quiet and steady. Elias Mercer stood near the viewing window, hands resting at his sides, watching the great ring of the station shrink against the dark background of space. Lights traced its curve like a living thing, calm and controlled, just as the Threxians preferred. For the first time since arriving, Elias felt something close to peace. Behind him, the ship was busy but calm. Crew members moved with purpose, speaking in low voices. No one celebrated, no one rushed. Humans understood that some victories were not loud, some were fragile and needed space to breathe. Elias knew his part was finished, but the story was not. Inside the Threxian habitat, the silence had changed. It was still quiet, but no longer empty. Catherine stood before a wide observation window, her hands clasped behind her back. Beyond the glass, stars drifted slowly, distant and countless. She felt different now, not overwhelmed, not afraid, just aware. The council's decision had spread through the habitat faster than expected. Official announcements were careful and limited, but unofficial conversations were not. Young Threxians spoke in longer sentences. Elders paused before responding. Some asked questions that had not been heard in generations. The council observed it all. Patterns were shifting. The matriarch stood beside her daughter, watching her closely. Catherine's markings glowed softly, no longer trying to hide their movement. You will be watched, the matriarch said. I know, Catherine replied. You will be blamed, her mother continued. I accept that, Catherine said. The matriarch studied her for a long moment. You sound certain. Across the habitat, council members reviewed long-term projections. For the first time, their models did not flatten into stillness. Curves appeared, variations, possibility. It frightened them. It also intrigued them. This path introduces instability, one elder said. It introduces resilience, another replied. Resilience is inefficient, the first argued. Only if survival is the sole goal, the matriarch said calmly. The council fell silent. In the days that followed, small changes continued. Story archives were reopened for review. Historical records once stripped of emotion were re-examined. Art forms that had been archived as unnecessary were studied again, cautiously. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. That was the human influence at work, even in absence. On Earth, news of Elias' return spread quietly. No grand announcements were made, no speeches, just reports, careful and factual. Human citizens responded in their usual way. They argued. Some said the risk had been too great, others said it had not gone far enough. Many simply shared stories, about meeting strangers, about moments that changed them, about times they chose to feel instead of hide. Across human networks, a simple phrase appeared again and again. Let them choose. When asked what humanity had gained, he replied honestly. Nothing we can measure, he said, and that's usually how it starts. Some were nervous. Some quietly began reviewing their own assumptions about humanity. Humans, as usual, did not notice right away. They were busy being human. Catherine's role grew slowly. She was not declared a leader. That would have caused resistance. Instead, she was asked to advise, to analyze, to observe patterns that others had missed. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, others listened. One cycle, the matriarch stood with her in a chamber filled with young Threxians. They were quiet, but their eyes were bright. Catherine spoke simply. You are not required to feel, she said, but you are allowed to. Still listening, it said. He smiled. Years later, historians would argue about when the shift truly began. Some would point to policy changes, others to demographic data. A few would trace it back to intercepted broadcasts or human ships gathering without threat. Very few would mention the whisper of a mother in an embassy hall, but the Threxians remembered. The matriarch, now older, stood once more before the stars. Her daughter stood beside her, no longer a child, not yet what others expected her to be. Do you regret it? The matriarch asked quietly. Catherine considered the question. No, she said. I regret only the years before I knew I could ask. They continued to argue, to fail, to try again, and the galaxy watched. Some civilizations resisted, some adapted slowly, some reached out. Humans answered most messages the same way, with stories, because in the end that was their greatest strength, not weapons, not technology, not numbers, but the refusal to stop sharing what it meant to be alive. On a quiet station far from Earth and Threxian space, a simple plaque was installed years later. It was not official. It was placed by travelers, diplomats, and wanderers from many worlds. It bore no names, only words translated into dozens of languages. They reminded us that silence is not peace and feeling is not weakness. And somewhere among the stars, a human voice laughed, another argued, another hoped. And an alien civilization listened, not because they were told to, but because they chose to.